usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision, like engineering.
Right, yeah. Binary.
Exactly. You break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points to it and says, there it is. It's broken. It's comforting, honestly.
We definitely like things to be visible and, categorized, grounded in objective reality.
Yeah, but then you step into the world of sociology or legal frameworks or gender dynamics, and suddenly it feels like someone just took a sledgehammer to that X-ray machine.
Oh, absolutely. The landscape is incredibly murky.
It really is. And today, we are exploring a thesis that claims that X-ray machine wasn't just accidentally broken. He claims it was intentionally dismantled by people who, quite frankly, despise the very concept of objective reality.
We are definitely wading into some intensely provocative waters today. I mean, the text we're examining fundamentally challenges the bedrock of how modern society defines truth.
Yeah, truth, justice, relationships, all of it. So we are doing a deep dive into a highly requested, massively controversial new ebook. It's dominating conversations across the men's rights and manosphere communities right now.
It's called Guilty Without Reason.
Right, Guilty Without Reason. Defending your mind from a court system built on leftist abstractions. And that's written by Conrad Riker.
And our mission today is to thoroughly unpack Riker's core argument, right? Because he presents this sweeping, really aggressive historical thesis.
Yeah, he claims Western institutions were fundamentally built on what he explicitly calls masculine logic. And then he argues that these very institutions have since been, systematically captured and subverted by feminists and Marxists.
Right. But before we open Chapter 1, I think it is absolutely crucial that we establish the boundaries for this deep dive.
Oh, 100%.
Because this text is intensely politically charged. It pulls zero punches. It takes direct aim at modern progressive thought. But our job today isn't to take a side. We aren't here to validate his claims, and we aren't here to condemn them either.
Exactly. Our role is just to crack this book open, explore the fascinating historical timelines that Riker presents, and impartially relay his arguments.
Right. We want you, the listener, to understand the precise blueprints of his worldview, whether you ultimately agree with him or not.
Perfectly framed. We are looking at the blueprints, not necessarily buying the house. But I will tell you, exploring these blueprints will absolutely make you want to read the full manual.
Oh, definitely.
So, right off the bat, if you haven't already, please make sure to like and subscribe to the show so you never miss these explorations. And I strongly encourage you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy Guilty Without Reason for yourself.
Yeah, you're going to want the unabridged context for this one.
For sure. Also, make sure to go follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack to see the ongoing discussions around his work. So, where do we start?
Well, to understand Riker's worldview, we really have to start where he starts, which, surprisingly, isn't in a modern HR department or a family court.
Right, he goes way back.
Exactly. He begins in antiquity. He establishes what we can call the epistemological fork.
And epistemology, just for the listener, is basically the philosophical study of how we know what we know, right?
Exactly. It's the study of truth.
Yeah.
And Riker argues that Western civilization was built on a very specific branch of this fork. He calls it patriarchal reason.
Patriarchal reason, yeah.
He traces the DNA of this reasoning from the relentless, categorical logic of Aristotle in ancient Athens through the precedent-based lawgivers of the Roman Republic, straight up into the Judeo-Christian commitment to ethical legalism.
And he spends a ton of time on the Enlightenment era.
Yeah.
Right? He positions those thinkers as the ultimate manifestation of this masculine epistemology.
Right. He's looking at John Locke, Immanuel Kant, and particularly Isaac Newton. Newton is actually central to his metaphor here.
How so?
Well, in 1687, Newton publishes the Principia Mathematica. He looks up at the chaotic, seemingly random movements of the heavens.
The stars, the planets, yeah.
Right. And instead of attributing it to the moods of the gods or some emotional mythology, he subjects the entire universe to unyielding mathematical order.
Wow.
And Riker argues that this is the essence of masculine epistemology, observing objective reality no matter how cold or indifferent it is, and bending it to empirical description.
And he says John Locke did the same thing, but for human rights, right? Establishing that knowledge comes from sensory experience, from observing the physical world.
Exactly.
So Riker is essentially arguing that Western civilization is like a massive complex operating system coded entirely in logic and empiricism.
That's a great way to put it. An OS designed to process verifiable data.
Right. But then he introduces the other side of the fork, the divergence. how exactly does he define the alternative to this logic-based operating system?
So he defines the divergence as a modern leftist and progressive academic framework. He claims this framework has replaced objective empirical reality with what he terms female-coded emotionalism and the blank slate myth.
Okay, let's pause on that. For those who might not be familiar with the sociology terminology, the blank slate is the idea that human behavior is almost entirely dictated by socialization, right?
Yes, it's the theory that gender is just a social construct, that biology doesn't dictate our cognitive patterns at all.
Basically that we are born as like empty hard drives waiting for society to upload our personalities.
Precisely. And Riker points to a very specific historical genesis for when this alternative operating system was forcefully installed into Western academia.
I remember this part. It points to 1935, right?
Yes, the 1935 relocation of the Frankfurt School. The Institute for Social Research moved from Germany to Columbia University in New York.
And according to his timeline, these Marxist theoreticians realized something critical about the working class.
Right. They realized the working class wasn't going to violently overthrow capitalism because, well, they were too busy building families and enjoying the rising standard of living that Western empiricism was providing.
So in Riker's view, since the economic revolution failed, they basically pivoted to a cultural revolution.
That is his core claim. He argues they explicitly sought to subvert the patriarchal family unit by pushing this blank slate ideology into the universities.
I see. Because if you can convince society that all human behavior is just constructed by oppressive power dynamics.
Then you can tear down the institutions that rely on natural biological order.
Exactly.
Okay, so to bring back that operating system analogy, if Western civilization is an OS coded in logic, Riker is saying modern academics are trying to run a totally incompatible emotion-based software on it.
Yes.
And that attempt is causing the whole system to crash. But how exactly does it crash, in his view? Like, what does that look like?
Well, he says it crashes because of the inherent contradiction, which Riker views as a glaring, almost comedic hypocrisy.
The hypocrisy of the academics.
Right. He notes that modern feminist academics attack Western civilization using the very technologies and societal freedoms that exist solely because of that patriarchal operating system.
Oh, right, the tenure example. Yes. He points out academics using tenure protections, which derive entirely from medieval male-built university traditions designed to protect objective truth seekers.
And they use those protections to preach that objective truth doesn't actually exist. That is wild.
Or, they post anti-capitalist manifestos on iPhones, a device that only exists because of Newtonian physics and ruthless global supply chains.
He calls them, performance artists unintentionally demonstrating the superiority of the system they seek to destroy.
It is a very sharp critique.
It is. But let's ground this.
Yeah.
Because Riker doesn't just stay in the ivory tower of philosophy. He brings receipts from the real world.
He definitely does.
He uses the 2017 case of James Damore as a primary case study for how this OS crash plays out in real time. Do you want to unpack that?
Yeah, the Damore case is pivotal for Riker's argument. Damore was a Google software engineer who wrote an internal memo. He titled it Google's Ideological Echo Chamber.
Right, I remember when that made the news.
He was responding to diversity initiatives by citing peer-reviewed mainstream psychological studies. Studies showing population-level differences in interests between men and women.
Specifically, that men, on average, lean toward an interest in things like systems and coding, while women lean toward an interest in people.
Exactly. And Riker frames Damore's subsequent firing as a modern-day heresy trial.
Basically saying Damore brought a spreadsheet to a feelings fight.
That's exactly how Riker portrays it. He details the mechanics of the fallout to prove his point. The corporate response to Damore wasn't a counter-argument dismantling his data, it was a moral panic.
Executives claimed his empirical data made employees feel unsafe.
Right. And Riker uses this to demonstrate that the institutional standard for truth had shifted. It went from, is this empirically accurate, to, does this verifiable fact cause emotional discomfort?
And because the data caused emotional discomfort, Damore was burned at the digital stake.
Exactly.
He also brings up a much darker, much more tragic case to aggressively dismantle the blank slate theory. The story of David Reimer from 1967.
Yeah, this is a tough one to read.
It is. But it's critical to Riker's assertion that biology is not just a social construct.
The Reimer case is Riker's empirical proof that the blank slate is a lethal biological dead end. So, David Reimer suffered a botched circumcision as an infant.
Just a horrific accident.
Right. And a prominent psychologist at Johns Hopkins named John Money convinced the parents to raise the boy as a female, naming him Brenda.
Because Money's entire thesis was that gender is fluid, right? That social conditioning could just effortlessly override biological reality.
Yes, but it didn't work. Riker walks through how the child's biological nature violently rejected this imposed identity from day one.
Despite being given hormones and wearing dresses.
Reimer exhibited typical male behavioral patterns, suffered severe psychological distress, and eventually transitioned back to living as a male when he learned the truth.
And the agonizing friction between his biological reality and his forced socialization ultimately led to his suicide in adulthood.
It's heartbreaking. And for Riker, this isn't just a sad anecdote. It is the ultimate tragic falsification of leftist gender theory. He argues that reality simply cannot be socially constructed.
And he makes the point that if you change the philosophy in the university, it eventually graduates into the real world. It doesn't stay confined to corporate HR departments or sociology classrooms.
No, it metastasizes.
Right. It metastasizes into the one place where objective truth matters most, where there are literal life, death, and freedom consequences. The courtroom.
This brings us to what Riker calls the legal crucible.
I found this section fascinating.
In his framework, the legal code is the perimeter wall of the masculine fortress. If the law falls to emotionalism, the civilization falls.
And he traces this masculine legal framework way back, right, to the Magna Carta of 1215.
He heavily emphasizes its clauses on property rights and due process. He actually relies on Hernando de Soto's economic research to argue that male-driven, enforceable property rights are the sole mechanism that has ever lifted the masses from destitution.
He also digs into Henry II's Assize of Clarendon in 1166.
Yeah.
Which I actually had to look up. It's essentially the foundation of the modern grand jury system.
Right, and the Assize of Clarendon is a perfect example of Riker's masculine logic replacing emotional chaos. Because before this, you had trial by ordeal.
Oh, like throwing someone in a river to see if they float?
Exactly. If they float, they're guilty because the water rejected them. It was mystical, emotional nonsense.
Right.
Henry II replaced that with a jury of peers tasked with evaluating actual evidence. Truth emerges through adversarial testing, cross-examination, and rigorous logic, not emotional appeals to a mob or superstitious feelings.
And he tracks us all the way to Sir Edward Coke in 1628, who famously used strict logic and common law precedent to hold an emotionally volatile King Charles accountable.
Yes.
But wait, this brings up a concept in the book that sounds incredibly provocative, almost offensive on its face, honestly. Riker introduces the idea of a legal testosterone threshold.
He does.
Is he using that term literally? Like tracking actual hormones in the courtroom? Or is it a metaphor for something structural?
He is using it as a structural metaphor, but one that is firmly rooted in biological archetypes. Riker theorizes that a functioning, impartial legal system requires a minimum threshold of masculine rationality.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning a strict adherence to objective facts over subjective feelings. When you drop that legal testosterone threshold and replace it with female-coded emotional reasoning, Riker argues the law immediately degenerates into arbitrary power and mob justice.
Okay, and he backs this up by looking at historical moments where that threshold collapsed, like the Salem witch trials of 1692.
Yes. He breaks down the precise mechanism of why Salem was a legal failure. The trials were driven by the hysterical accusations of a group of young women, obviously.
But the legal mechanism was the real issue.
Right. The legal mechanism that allowed the executions was the admission of spectral evidence. This was the idea that a witch's specter or spirit could attack a victim invisibly.
Which is impossible to defend against.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you cross-examine a ghost? You can't.
Exactly. Riker points out that the moment the court accepted invisible emotional trauma, like the girls thrashing on the floor claiming they felt pain as forensic proof of a crime, logic died. Objective reality was overruled by hurt feelings.
And he applies the exact same lens to the French Revolution's reign of terror.
He does. Robespierre's Committee of Public Safety didn't rely on due process. They relied on accusations of crimes against virtue.
So feminine virtue rhetoric replaced legal precedent.
And it resulted in a hysterical bloodbath where the mere accusation of being anti-revolutionary was enough to send you to the guillotine.
And here's the core of Riker's legal argument. He claims this exact degeneration, this reliance on spectral evidence, is happening right now in our modern courts.
Yes, he specifically targets the 1981 Duluth model for domestic violence response.
Let's get into the Duluth model because it's central to his critique of the modern justice system.
It was created by Ellen Pence, a feminist activist. The model is a conceptual framework that explicitly instructs law enforcement and the courts to view every domestic dispute through a mandatory lens of patriarchal power and control.
And Riker argues it completely bypasses empirical data.
Completely.
Okay, let's walk the listener through a scenario here to explain the actual mechanics of this.
Oh.
How does the Duluth model bypass data in the real world?
Okay, so under the influence of the Duluth model, many jurisdictions adopted primary aggressor policies. Imagine a 911 call is made for a domestic dispute. The police arrive.
Okay.
Riker argues that the responding officers are essentially trained by this model to assess the scene not by gathering neutral forensic evidence of who started the altercation, but by looking at physical size and the perceived gender power dynamic.
So even if the man called the police, and even if he has scratch marks on him, the model dictates that because he is the larger male, he is inherently the oppressor in the power dynamic.
Exactly. Riker claims this policy means the physically larger male is routinely thrown in handcuffs and removed from his home, regardless of the specific empirical evidence of that specific incident.
The overarching political theory of patriarchy basically overrides the localized truth of the event.
Yes. And Riker expands this critique to Title IX's kangaroo courts on college campuses, too.
Right, where he claims young men are stripped of the right to cross-examine their accusers, which he compares directly to a reversion to Salem-era spectral evidence. The accusation itself is considered proof.
Right.
So if Riker genuinely believes the system is rigged to view a woman's tears as forensic proof of a felony, how does he advise men to actually protect themselves? Because that sounds terrifying.
Riker advocates for extreme, almost clinical pragmatism. He tells men they must adopt a strategy of continuous, methodical recording of all interactions and financial transactions.
Basically, treat your personal life like a rigorous scientific experiment.
Exactly. In a system built on emotional falsehoods, he argues that overwhelming empirical data is the only shield you have.
He also paints a very grim picture of the family courts, specifically citing the 1986 Bradley Amendment.
Yes, the Bradley Amendment made it essentially impossible to retroactively reduce child support debts, even if the father loses his job or goes to prison.
Wow.
Riker uses this to frame modern family courts as a wealth extraction machine. He argues that the state has functionally replaced the father with a taxpayer check and the threat of a cage.
So in Riker's view, the courts are subsidizing female choices, like initiating no-fault divorce through state violence. They're treating men as state-regulated financial utilities.
That's his argument. So his advice is deeply defensive, maintaining separate legal jurisdictions for wealth, utilizing trusts, and keeping meticulous financial documentation completely divorced from a partner's reach.
But Riker notes a critical secondary mechanism here. To get men to quietly accept this kind of legal subjugation and wealth extraction, society first had to break them psychologically.
They had to be convinced that their natural instincts were inherently dangerous.
Which brings us to the invention of toxic masculinity and what Riker calls the psychological war. This section of the book is really intense.
It is. He focuses heavily on the American Psychological Association's 2018 guidelines for psychological practice with boys and men.
And Riker argues that these 2018 APA guidelines represent the institutional capture of the human mind, right?
Yes. The guidelines explicitly suggest that traditional masculinity marked by stoicism, competitiveness, dominance, and aggression is, on the whole, psychologically harmful.
And Riker points out that these are the exact traits that built Western civilization, explored the globe, and won world wars.
Right, and now they are being officially pathologized by activist academics.
He introduces a term here, the gynocentric silence bubble. What does he mean by that?
The gynocentric silence bubble is his term for the systemic, deliberate suppression of empirical data that contradicts the overarching feminist narrative, the narrative of universal male oppression and universal female victimhood.
What kind of data is he claiming is being suppressed?
A primary example he cites is sociological research regarding reciprocal domestic violence. Riker points to numerous studies showing that in non-reciprocal domestic violence situations, women initiate violence at equal or even higher rates than men.
Oh, wow.
But he claims this data is actively memory holed by the media, academia, and the legal system to maintain the illusion required for frameworks like the Duluth model to function.
And alongside the suppression of data, Riker talks about the emotional supremacy fallacy.
Right.
This is the societal messaging that holds up female coping mechanisms like openly crying, seeking communal support, constantly verbalizing emotions as the universal gold standard for mental health.
Conversely, it punishes male coping mechanisms, like retreating into stoicism or trying to physically solve the problem, as avoidant or toxic.
And this creates what Reichert considers the most devastating psychological trap of the modern era, the double bind.
The double bind is crucial to his theory. Society and modern therapy relentlessly demands that men open up. They are told that to be a good partner, they must be vulnerable and cry.
But Riker uses evolutionary psychology to argue this is a fatal error. And he cites Steven Pinker's empirical data here, right?
He does. He uses Pinker's work to argue that the female brain evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to rely on strong, unflappable protectors in a dangerous world.
Okay, so therefore?
Therefore, when a man actually follows society's advice and displays genuine weeping vulnerability, it subconsciously signals to the female brain that the protector is broken.
So in Riker's view, society tells men to cry, but the moment they do, it triggers a biological disgust response in their partner.
Yes, leading to a loss of respect and sexual attraction.
I have to say, looking at the world as a constant, inescapable biological trap sounds incredibly exhausting. I mean, how does he expect men to live like that day to day? It sounds like a recipe for deep depression.
It is a very stark worldview, and Riker connects this exact exhaustion directly to the tragic modern male suicide epidemic.
He points to the 2022 CDC data, right, showing male suicide rates are roughly 4 times higher than female rates.
Right. And the mainstream progressive narrative often blames this on toxic masculinity, claiming men are dying because societal conditioning prevents them from expressing their feelings.
But Riker completely flips that script. He aggressively dismantles the idea that men are dying because they can't cry.
Instead, he applies Emil Durkheim's sociological concept from 1897, anomic suicide.
Anomie, which essentially translates to normlessness, right?
Exactly. It occurs when a society undergoes massive changes that eradicate a group's historical social norms, expectations, and purposes.
So Riker argues men are dying from anomie. They have been stripped of their patriarchal utility, their societal respect, and their biological purpose as protectors and providers.
They aren't dying from a lack of tears, they are dying from a catastrophic lack of purpose in a society that tells them their very nature is toxic.
So if modern therapy is a trap that triggers female disgust, and society is suffering from anomie, what is Riker's prescription? I mean, just bottle everything up until you explode.
Not at all. Riker's solution is highly proactive and internal. He advocates for a rigorous return to classical Stoicism.
He references Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus a lot.
Yes, he tells men to stop seeking emotional validation from a society that despises them. Instead, they must forge the iron of the body through intense physical training, master high-value skills to build undeniable economic competence.
And build what he calls the sledgehammer intellect by obsessively reading foundational Western philosophy.
Exactly.
It's fascinating because he points out how early this psychological warfare begins. He cites the 1994 Gun-Free Schools Act and subsequent zero-tolerance policies in elementary schools.
Right. Riker claims these policies essentially criminalize natural male behavior. The rough and tumble play, the mock aggression that boys use to establish hierarchies, all of it was banned.
To fit boys into a female-coded, docile, sit-still-and-listen classroom environment.
And the consequence of that trap is mass medicalization. Riker argues that when boys naturally resist this unnatural environment, they are chemically lobotomized via mass ADHD overdiagnosis and stimulant prescriptions.
He also highlights the tragic hypocrisy of the state through the story of Pat Tillman, the NFL player who walked away from millions to become an Army Ranger after 9/11.
It's a powerful example. Riker notes that the state absolutely loves male aggression, dominance, and stoic sacrifice when it needs protectors to fight its foreign wars.
Right. But the exact same media and psychiatric apparatus that cheers for the soldier pathologizes those very traits as toxic the moment that man returns home to his family.
And this psychological conditioning, the legal threat, the constant pathologizing of male nature, it completely warps how men interact in the dating world.
Which leads directly to Riker's analysis of the sexual marketplace, a section he titles Relational Praxeology.
Riker's view of the modern dating market is heavily, almost exclusively, grounded in evolutionary biology. He focuses on female hypergamy.
And just for the listener, hypergamy is the biological drive for women to seek out and mate with men who are of higher status, wealth, or genetic fitness than themselves.
Right. And Riker brings up the famous 80-20 rule. asserting that digital dating apps and modern feminism have removed all historical, societal restrictions on mating.
Because in the past, monogamy was enforced by the church and society to ensure most men had a stake in the civilization.
Exactly. Today, those guardrails are gone.
Meaning, according to his framework, women can exclusively pursue the top 20% of men, engaging in what he calls the alpha fucks beta bucks schema.
Yes. He argues that women spend their peak fertility years riding a carousel of top-tier genetically gifted men who will not commit to them.
This creates what the manosphere calls alpha widows.
Right. Women who are psychologically and chemically incapable of pair bonding with average men because their baseline for attraction has been permanently skewed by brief encounters with the elite.
And then, when their biological clock sounds the alarm, they pivot. They seek to extract resources and commitment from a subjugated, economically successful, but physically average nice guy.
And Riker aggressively dismantles the nice guy strategy. He pulls from Ayn Rand's objectivist ethics to describe the nice guy as operating on a covert contract.
The covert contract. This is a fascinating psychological concept. The nice guy believes that submissiveness, compliance, and doing favors earn him love and sexual access.
Right. He doesn't state these terms, he just acts accommodating and gets resentful when the woman doesn't pay up with affection.
I want to fix a cliche analogy here. People often describe the nice guy as treating women like a vending machine. Input nice coins, expect sex to fall out.
Right, you hear that a lot.
But reading Riker, it feels deeper than that. It's less like a vending machine and more like a massive, complex legal contract where the nice guy signed his terms in invisible ink.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
He never showed the woman the terms, she never agreed to them, but he gets furiously resentful when she doesn't honor a contract she never actually read.
That is a much more accurate metaphor for Riker's point. He argues this invisible ink contract is intellectually dishonest. It aligns with a Marxist transactional entitlement, the idea that effort alone entitles you to reward.
Furthermore, Riker states it is fundamentally biologically repulsive to women because compliance signals weakness, not fitness.
So, to survive this brutal marketplace, Riker details the concept of the rational frame.
But hold on, in the text, he describes this by drawing on Plato's forms and Aristotle's concept of telos. We need a plain English translation here. What does telos actually mean for a guy standing in his kitchen trying to talk to his wife?
Excellent point. In philosophy, telos means the ultimate purpose or inherent goal of a thing. Plato's forms refers to the ideal, objective, unchanging reality of a concept.
Okay.
So when Riker tells a man to hold the rational frame, he means the man must anchor himself to his objective reality and his ultimate purpose. He must act as the unmoved mover.
A high-value man does not bend his objective reality to accommodate female emotional volatility. He is the rock. The emotion is the wave.
And this plays out in how he advises men to handle shit tests.
Oh boy. Explain how he defines shit tests.
Riker defines shit tests not as logical debates, but as subconscious evolutionary probes. A woman isn't arguing with you because she cares about the specific topic. She is subconsciously testing to see if you are strong enough to lead and protect her.
So if a man takes the bait and argues back using logic against her emotion, he fails the test. He proves he can be destabilized.
The solution he offers is amused mastery. It's treating the chaos calmly, refusing to match the emotional frequency.
To illustrate this, Riker gives a very vivid hypothetical scenario. Picture a modern husband cornered in his kitchen.
Right.
His wife lowers her voice, crosses her arms, and threatens to leave for her mother's house over some completely absurd, trivial demand. What is she actually testing?
She's testing his emotional stability.
Right. And Riker details how the feminized man fails this. The feminized man panics. He begs. He tries to reason using daytime TV therapy talking points.
He validates her irrational feelings.
Exactly. And by doing so, he proves he is weak, instantly killing her attraction to him.
But the red-pilled man, utilizing the rational frame, handles it entirely differently. He looks at her, completely calm. He doesn't yell.
He tells her to drive safely, to let him know when she's ready to talk like an adult. He pours himself a drink, and he walks away to his study.
By remaining the unmoved mover, he establishes patriarchal authority and emotional rock solidity without ever resorting to aggressive insecurity.
But maintaining this rational frame in your living room is incredibly difficult when you recognize the broader cultural matrix that is constantly trying to break that frame from the outside.
Which brings us to the media, the tech monopolies, and the final ideological battlefield of the book, the NPC matrix.
Riker uses the term NPC matrix, referring to non-player characters in video games, who just repeat pre-programmed lines of dialogue to describe the ideological possession of the modern left.
He claims the corporate media and tech monopolies enforce a post-truth hive mind. He says these people do not possess ideas. Ideas possess them.
And he argues they have deliberately restructured the rules of language and debate to make rational masculine discourse impossible.
This introduces the critical concept of frame control. In any debate, whoever sets the premise controls the outcome. Riker teaches men to absolutely never accept the linguistic traps of the left.
The clearest, most dangerous example he gives is the modern redefinition of the word violence.
Yes, for all of Western history, violence meant physical harm. Now, progressive ideologues claim that disagreeing with them or using the wrong pronouns is literal violence.
He argues they do this specifically to weaponize the natural male aversion to inflicting actual violence. Most men don't want to be violent. So if you accept their premise that your speech is violence, you've already lost. You end up silencing your own logical faculties just to appease their emotional fragility.
And Riker points out the mechanics of modern censorship operate on this exact premise. Censorship today is not about protecting objective truth. It's about protecting a fragile narrative from masculine logic.
He brings receipts here too.
He cites empirical examples: the BBC's 2019 Trusted News Initiative, the active suppression of the 2020 Hunter Biden laptop story by tech fact-checkers, and the revelations of the 2022 Twitter files.
He uses these to prove that a censorship cartel operates on dogma rather than data, silencing truth to protect the emotional comfort of the ideology.
So how does a man actually deploy resistance in real life when confronted with these institutional buzzwords in a corporate meeting or classroom? How does he use what Riker calls the Socratic breaker?
The Socratic breaker. It's a tactical, real-world application of the sledgehammer intellect. When confronted with weaponized buzzwords like equity, systemic oppression, or microaggressions, Riker insists you must never defend yourself.
Because defense is submission.
Exactly. Instead, you aggressively interrogate the premise. They define their terms using empirical data, not lived experience or emotional grievance. You shatter their frame by forcing them into the realm of logic.
He cites an incredible historical example of this frame control: Norman Mailer's infamous 1971 town hall debate in New York City.
Oh, this is a great story. Mailer debated a panel of high-profile radical feminists, including Germaine Greer.
Riker breaks down exactly how Mailer won. While the panel was screaming, hurling insults, and staging theatrical sit-ins, Mailer acted as the unmoved mover.
He simply giggled at their hysteria and calmly demanded adherence to the rules of logic.
He refused to match their emotional frequency, and by holding the logical frame, he forced them to expose their own ideological vacuum to the audience.
To sustain this kind of lifelong resistance, Riker calls for Roman amicitia, which translates to strategic, localized brotherhood.
He believes men cannot survive this matrix alone. They must form tight, offline networks of highly competent allies to support each other through the inevitable legal battles, HR firings, and social ostracization that comes from speaking objective truth.
And, crucially, he advocates for the financial go-Galt strategy.
Named after John Galt, the protagonist from Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, who leads the creators of the world to go on strike against a parasitic society.
Exactly. The go-Galt strategy involves systematically minimizing your tax footprint, avoiding corporate climbing that exposes you to HR tribunals, and refusing to participate in what he calls the gynocentric economy.
It's the rational, calculated withdrawal of male protective and providing energies from a society that actively despises the men who built it.
Wow. We've covered an immense, heavy amount of ground today. From Aristotle and the Magna Carta to Google Memos, the Duluth model, and evolutionary psychology.
Riker's Guilty Without Reason is undeniably a dense, provocative, unapologetic manual that takes a sledgehammer to the foundations of modern cultural norms.
It is a stark worldview. And whether you align with his conclusions or find them deeply unsettling, his framework raises profound questions about the nature of truth itself.
If we step back from the specific arguments about gender and patriarchy, this raises an existential question for the listener.
Yeah, think about this. If Riker is correct that society is irreparably fractured between those who believe in objective empirical reality and those who believe reality is socially and emotionally constructed,
what happens when those two groups can no longer even agree on the definitions of words?
how does the civilization function when the very language of law, science, and morality is permanently bifurcated?
That is a chilling thought to mull over. When the dictionary itself becomes a battlefield, how do you even begin to write the peace treaty?
Listen, If this deep dive sparked your interest, if it challenged your worldview, or if it made you want to explore the mechanics of these arguments at the source, you absolutely must check Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks right now to buy Guilty Without Reason.
You need to read the full, unabridged arguments for yourself to truly grasp the scope of his historical timelines.
The amount of data points and historical precedent he weaves together to build this architecture is vast. It requires a direct reading.
It really does.
And be sure to join the community and follow the author at Conrad Mantriker at Substack to stay updated on his work. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Remember to like and subscribe to the show, and until next time, keep questioning the frame.